The autumn leaves crunched beneath Martha Washington's worn sneakers as she made her way up the front steps of her modest home on Elm Street. At 73, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that each step mattered. Her grocery bags, though light, felt heavier these days, but she refused to let age defeat her independence. She had lived in this neighborhood for 47 years, raised 3 children here, buried her husband from the church down the street, and watched the community change around her. Some changes were welcome: the new park, the renovated library, the young families moving in. Others were not. Martha fumbled with her keys, her arthritis making the simple task more challenging than it used to be. As she finally managed to unlock her door, she noticed the envelope that had been shoved under it. No postmark, no return address, just her name scrawled in angry block letters. Inside, the message was brief and venomous: "Your kind isn't welcome here anymore. Leave before we make you leave." It wasn't the first such message she'd received. Over the past 6 months, there had been 5 others, each more threatening than the last. Someone had also spray-painted a slur on her mailbox, thrown eggs at her windows, and left burning crosses made of twigs on her front lawn. Each incident had been reported to the local police, who took notes, nodded sympathetically, and did very little else. Martha sank into her favorite armchair, the one her late husband James had surprised her with on their 20th anniversary. She reached for the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Marcus Washington speaking. The voice was professional, crisp. "Hello, son." The tone immediately softened. "Mama? Everything all right?" Martha looked down at the letter in her trembling hands. "I got another one." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled, but Martha could hear the steel beneath it. She had raised this boy, after all. She knew when he was angry. "Read it to me." Martha did, her voice steady despite her fear. She had faced down segregation, poverty, the loss of her husband, and the challenge of raising 3 children on a teacher's salary. She wouldn't let some cowards with unsigned letters break her now. "Mama, I'm coming home." "You don't need to do that, baby. I can handle this." "I know you can. But you shouldn't have to." Marcus Washington hung up the phone in his office at the FBI's Washington, D.C. field office and stared out at the gray November sky. For 15 years, he had been investigating hate crimes, domestic terrorism, and organized criminal enterprises. He had put away white supremacists, gang leaders, and corrupt politicians. But none of those cases had felt as personal as this one. His mother had never told him about her struggles growing up in Alabama, about the cross burning in their yard when he was 5, about the jobs she couldn't get because of the color of her skin. She had shielded him from the worst of it, focused instead on education, opportunity, and building a better future. She had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, celebrated when he graduated from law school, and cried with pride when he joined the bureau. Now someone was threatening the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a chance at this life. Marcus made a few phone calls, arranged for some time off, and began packing. But he also made one more call, to his partner, Special Agent Sarah Chen. "I need a favor," he said when she picked up. "Name it." "I need you to run some background checks on a neighborhood. And I need you to be very, very thorough." 3 days later, Marcus sat in his mother's kitchen, drinking coffee from the same mismatched mugs he had used as a child. His trained eye noted the new deadbolt on the front door, the way his mother glanced nervously at every sound outside, the baseball bat she now kept by her bedside. "Tell me about the neighbors," he said. Martha had lived on Elm Street long enough to know everyone's business. She told him about Mrs. Patterson, who had been nothing but kind, about the young Rodriguez family who always waved from their yard, about old Mr. Thompson who had actually started walking with her to the grocery store after the harassment began. But she also told him about the house 3 doors down, where a group of young men had moved in 6 months ago. They kept to themselves mostly, but she had noticed the Confederate flag in their window, the motorcycles with strange symbols, the way they stared at her when she walked by. "The one with the shaved head and the tattoos," she said. "I've seen him putting things in my mailbox." Marcus nodded, filing away every detail. That evening, he took a walk around the neighborhood, his trained eye cataloging everything. The house his mother had described stood out immediately, not just for the flag in the window, but for the other symbols Marcus recognized from his years investigating hate groups. The Iron Cross sticker on the mailbox, the runic symbols spray-painted on the garage door, the 88 painted subtly on the curb, these weren't just local troublemakers. These were organized over the next few days. Marcus watched and listened. He saw the pattern of intimidation, not just against his mother, but against the Rodriguez family, against the elderly Jewish couple on the corner, against anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. He watched them distribute flyers, recruit new members, and plan what they clearly thought were anonymous acts of terror. They had no idea they were being observed by someone who had spent his career learning to think like them, to predict their moves, to build cases that would stand up in federal court. The break came on a Thursday evening. Marcus was sitting in his rental car, positioned where he could watch the house, when he saw 3 of the men leaving with gasoline cans and what looked like weapons. He followed them at a distance, his blood running cold when he realized they were heading toward his mother's street. He called for backup first, then his mother. "Mama, I need you to go to Mrs. Patterson's house right now. Don't ask questions, just go." Martha Washington had not survived 7 decades by ignoring her instincts. She heard the urgency in her son's voice and acted immediately. 20 minutes later, Marcus watched from his concealed position as the 3 men crept toward his mother's house. They had Molotov cocktails, a can of spray paint, and what appeared to be a pipe bomb. In the darkness, they moved with the confidence of people who had done this before, who believed they were untouchable. They were wrong. As soon as they stepped onto his mother's property, Marcus and the backup team moved in. The arrests were swift and professional. The men who had terrorized his mother and her neighbors found themselves face down on the ground, being read their rights by the very person they had been targeting. "You have the right to remain silent," Marcus said to the man with the shaved head, the one his mother had seen at her mailbox. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The search warrants came through within hours. The house 3 doors down yielded a treasure trove of evidence, hate literature, plans for additional attacks, communications with other supremacist groups across the country, and enough weapons and explosives to level half the block. But more importantly, it yielded connections. Phone numbers, email addresses, bank accounts, and meeting locations. Within a week, the FBI had rolled up an entire network that stretched across 3 states. The trial made national news. Marcus testified not as the son of a victim, but as the lead federal agent on a domestic terrorism case. He presented evidence methodically, professionally, letting the facts speak for themselves. The defense tried to paint their clients as misunderstood young men exercising their First Amendment rights. The jury didn't buy it. Conspiracy charges, hate crimes, terrorism charges, weapons violations. The sentences added up to decades in federal prison. After the trial, Martha Washington stood on her front steps, looking at her neighborhood with new eyes. The Confederate flag was gone from the window 3 houses down. The new neighbors who moved in were a young couple with a baby on the way. Mrs. Patterson had organized a block party to celebrate. Marcus found her there, still wearing his suit from the courthouse. "You know," she said, not turning around, "I always wondered why you chose the job you did. Why you wanted to chase criminals and put yourself in danger. And now you know?" She turned to face her son, this man she had raised to believe in justice, in standing up for what was right, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "Now I know you were always meant to be exactly where you are." The harassment stopped. The threats ended. But more than that, Martha Washington realized that the neighborhood she had loved for nearly 50 years had revealed its true character. The vast majority of her neighbors, people of all colors, all backgrounds, all beliefs, had stood with her. They had offered support, provided witness testimony, and made it clear that hate had no home on Elm Street. As for Marcus, he returned to Washington, D.C. with a renewed understanding of why his work mattered. Every case he worked, every criminal he pursued, every act of hatred he helped prosecute, it all led back to a simple truth his mother had taught him long ago. Good people might not always be the loudest voices, but when they stand together, they're always the strongest. The men who had terrorized his mother had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that an elderly black woman living alone was an easy target, someone without protection or recourse. They never imagined that the quiet, dignified woman they were threatening had raised a son who had dedicated his life to ensuring that justice wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. They never considered that their anonymous acts of cowardice would be met by someone who had both the training and the authority to hold them accountable. Most of all, they never understood that when you attack someone's family, you don't just make an enemy, you make a lifelong commitment to justice. Martha Washington kept the last letter they sent her, not as a reminder of fear, but as a reminder of something else entirely. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who end up learning the hardest lessons about the power of family, the reach of justice, and the dangerous mistake of assuming that anyone, regardless of age, race, or apparent vulnerability, is truly defenseless. In the end, the story wasn't really about racists targeting an elderly woman. It was about what happens when hatred collides with a love so deep and a commitment to justice so strong that no amount of intimidation could ever be enough to overcome it. The neighborhood on Elm Street became peaceful again. Martha Washington continued to live independently, walk to the grocery store, and tend her small garden. But now she did so knowing that somewhere in Washington, D.C., her son was working every day to ensure that what happened to her would happen to fewer and fewer people, and in FBI field offices across the country, agents who had worked the case told the story to new recruits as an example of why their work mattered, why domestic terrorism cases were so important, and why sometimes the most personal cases were the ones that made the biggest difference. The men who had thought they were targeting a helpless elderly woman had instead awakened a sleeping giant of federal law enforcement. Their act of hatred had become a catalyst for justice, their assumption of immunity had become a federal case study, and their anonymous terrorism had become a very public reminder that in America, no one, regardless of age, race, or circumstances, stands alone when faced with hatred. Martha Washington never moved from Elm Street. She didn't need to. Home, she had learned, isn't just a place you live. It's a place where you're protected, where justice matters, and where love, even when it comes in the form of federal law enforcement, always finds a way to prevail.